This week on Newsnight, Epic Universe opens, becoming Central Florida's first new theme park in 25 years. A look at the impact on the economy and transportation. Plus, the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission moves ahead with a $6 million Sunshine Corridor feasibility study. Newsnight starts now.
Hello, I'm Steve Mort. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take an in-depth look at the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, Universal's $7 billion bet on Central Florida's tourism market. The opening of Epic Universe last week marked the end of a 6-year journey and Comcast's largest ever investment in its theme park business. But while tourism numbers for Florida look strong, the potential for storm clouds on the economic horizon could pose risks for the hospitality industry. I sat down earlier this week with UCF economist Sean Snaith to talk about it.
The bar, I think, has been set significantly higher for future parks, whether it's Disney or Universal or other competitors, just the use of technology. I think it's an inflection point in the industry.
Do you think we'll see a response fairly rapidly from other theme park operators in terms of what they might offer, trying to get people in the door, take some of that shine off, or attention at least off Epic Universe?
Well, there's always some competitive element here too, but it's not a zero-sum game. So, bringing another 1.5, 2 million visitors into the region every year, grows the pie for everybody. So, there is competition, make no mistake, but this rising tide sort of helping to lift all boats. And obviously, the operation of a new theme park, there's thousands of employees that work for Universal, but they'll have many suppliers in the region that do business with Epic Universe, and so those suppliers gain business, new suppliers come in, new businesses are created. All the employees down the supply chain have jobs as a result of what's happening at Impact. So it sort of ripples out through the region, and it's significant in terms of economic activity. It's significant in terms of job creation. It's also significant in terms of tax revenue.
I'm kind of interested in the infrastructure part of this, because anybody who drives in that part of town knows that traffic is bad. It's challenging sometimes to get from downtown Orlando to Disney, certainly around the Sand Lake area. And I wonder whether a huge new development like this, a huge new draw for visitors, has an effect on the transportation infrastructure. And I wonder how locally we deal with that.
Well, part of the development of Epic was an agreement between Orange County and NBC Universal to basically split the cost of improvements on Kirkman Road. And that extension, that had been on Orange County's to-do list for 20 plus years. So, that's helpful. But you're right, you bring in more visitors, and it's, it always seems to be this way. The development precedes the needed infrastructure. And so, there's more to do.
Let's talk about visitor numbers, broadly speaking. We hear a lot from the state government that the visitor numbers have been very strong, especially in 2024 and in the first quarter of 2025. We do also hear from economists some concerns about a potential recession, price increases, drop off in international visitation. I wonder if this is a risky time to launch a theme park.
Well, I think in general, tourism is a cyclical industry. When the economy's slowing, people are going into a recession. Vacations are sort of a low-hanging fruit that a household that's trying to tighten its belt can.
Discretionary spending.
So, it's not recession-proof. Now, some of this, of course, especially in the early years, you've just got a fan base for some of these intellectual properties, Harry Potter and Nintendo, that the novelty of it will ride out any uncertainty and potential slowdown. We're not forecasting a recession, but we are forecasting a slowing in the economy in the next couple of years.
Sean Snaith there from UCF. Well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. Joining us in the studio for the first time, Giovanni Diaz from WFTV Channel 9, reporter over there at Channel 9. Thanks so much for coming in, Giovanni.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it coming back to the program. Randy Hildreth from Fox 35. Good to see you today, Randy.
Good to be here.
And favourite of the show, Ryan Lynch from the Orlando Business Journal. Good to see you, Ryan.
Good to be here as always.
Thanks so much for coming in, guys. Let me start with you, Giovanni, because you were at the opening of Epic Universe. You guys covered this pretty extensively.
Sure was.
What did you see in terms of crowds and the operations, and also, you know, how the park was received by visitors?
Well, once again, thanks for having me. Let me just start by saying it is massive. That place is ginormous.
Yeah.
So there was a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that everything flows nicely. And when we were there, we were actually for the media, like sneak peek kind of thing. So we were taken behind the scenes to see how the operations were going to go.
Yeah.
And you can tell that they put a lot of money into the technology of that structure. You know, like there was a lot of animatronics going on, a lot of those little details that you would expect from a theme park, but escalated to the 10th intensity. It's really, really good.
Just jumping ahead on this one, I mean, because you mentioned the technology, and the Business Journal has done some reporting on that technology, particularly the use of AI.
Oh yeah, and a lot of it is incorporated into some of the sensors they have in the park, you know, whether that's shaping the ride experience or setting up some of the potential in the future. I know Universal itself did not confirm to us, what type of exact technology, but a lot of the photos we've seen and experts we spoke with said, hey, there's sensors around that can kind of shape the experience or set up the opportunity for something like an NFT where you can have a little avatar that represents your character, and you're able to track your stats, like let's say on the Mario games inside that Super Mario Land. So some of the technology there, some of it's there already, and some of it kind of sets up that future path to where we might see some of that innovation that they file patents for to really come out on the page and be things that people can actually interact with.
Interesting, a lot of intellectual property there for sure. Let's get down to the nuts and bolts when it comes to our community. Then there had been concerns, right, about the amount of traffic that Epic might generate, whether the Kirkland extension would sort of hold up. What has the traffic been like in the first few days, and the numbers of people we've seen visiting that park?
Obviously, traffic is going to be a big conversation. We already know that there's a lot of traffic in that area, and Epic is Epic, but everybody is not going to the park. People are living and working in that area. So as you mentioned, a lot of concerns about traffic. I spoke with one of my photographers in preparation for the panel, and he was there for opening day, and just anecdotally, he said normal traffic, but didn't see anything too crazy. When we checked in with law enforcement, they didn't note anything too crazy. And you also have to factor in, there's been years in preparation for Epic Universe to open in all of its glory. And then all of the roads leading to Epic Universe, there's been a lot of preparation for that. We talk about the Kirkland Road extension, very expensive, but if you ask county leaders, worth every penny. It's about a 2-mile extension. It has that elevated traffic circle. And when we, in our coverage, spoke with theme park experts, they talked about, you know, chef's kiss. We appreciate this elevated traffic circle because it keeps people moving without having to stop at lights. It has a dedicated bus lane, and so really moving people through that area so it's not a hindrance to people, one, trying to get to Epic Universe very quickly, and then also people who live in the area. It's taking traffic off of some of the roads that other people would have been using to get to work, to get their children to school. And when we talk about traffic and the numbers, as I mentioned, the photographer that I spoke to said that he didn't see a lot of traffic, and even when looking at parking lot capacity on that opening day, he said parking lots were not full. But when you look at some of the theme park blogs or bloggers, they talked about limiting capacity on that opening day. You want to make sure everything is perfect, but as we get deeper into the summer, we expect them to increase the capacity for the park, the number of visitors that they will allow each day. So we'll put an asterisk mark next to traffic and attendance, because we'll have to see how things progress as we get deeper into summer and more people want to come.
So let's talk about the economic impact, shall we? And we'll start with the pre-Epic Universe world, if you like. How have the tourism numbers looked through the first quarter of this year? I'll start with you, Ryan.
So yeah, the state of Florida and Orlando both had strong numbers in 24. State of Florida had about 143 million. That's almost a 2% increase from last year. Orlando had about 75 million, also a roughly 2% increase.
Yeah.
And then looking at the numbers for the first quarter, the numbers are mostly flat. There's a lot of domestic visitation, roughly 92% of that visitation number was from U.S. travelers.
Yeah.
And international was the rest of that. And the kind of striking one was Canadian visitation was down a couple of percent compared to, obviously, with all the geopolitical things going on between the U.S. and Canada, that has kind of had an impact so far. And it remains to be seen how, something like Epic Universe might impact those numbers for Central Florida in terms of bringing numbers. I know earlier in the year we hit some record numbers for tourist development tax, that tax collected on short-term rentals and hotels.
Yeah.
So we'll have to track those numbers and kind of see, are people continuing to come to the region, and what groups of folks are coming to the region, whether those are domestic or international folks.
I mean, there are concerns, aren't there, Randy, about the trajectory of the economy overall, particularly that drop in international travel that Ryan just mentioned. I mean, is there concern, do you think, in the hospitality industry that it could be susceptible here to a decline in international visitors? I mean, we know from, say, 9/11 and from COVID that the hospitality industry is particularly susceptible to shocks.
Certainly a vulnerable industry. You need people to come here to spend money, and, they're watching these numbers very closely. As you were talking about the breakdown of who is coming to our area, international visitors don't make up a large percentage of the pie, but it's certainly not a slice of the pie that the hospitality industry wants to lose. Right, they come, they tend to stay longer. That means they have to get a hotel room. That means they have to pay for all of those days in the hotel room. They may go to the theme parks more than one day. They're buying food. They're buying merchandise. And so that is a large, as I mentioned, a large piece of the pie, or a portion of the pie that they don't want to lose. There's some concerns from international visitors about some of the Trump policies that have come out, and so there's been hesitation to come to these.
Policies,
Yes, the border policies, or even some concerns about some of the trade policies that have come out, some of the conversations. How does that translate into the economic impact for us? And depending on who you ask, the numbers may fluctuate, but we're looking at billions of dollars if people don't come.
And just to pinpoint back to what Randy was saying, that I actually interviewed just this past week the former deputy director of the National Economic Council about what we are expecting to see over the next year or so. So we are expecting to see a slight, maybe quite the drop for next year, especially from the Canadians, because of the issues going on with the tariffs and everything. Now, regarding the summer, as of right now, and what we are expecting to see for the next 4 months, we are still in the good shape when it comes to expecting tourists here in our area across Central Florida, especially international travelers. I spoke with the owner of a travel agency who's been around for 26 years in this area. And she said, because of Epic Universe, there is a 3-month wait time for them to actually be able to book someone to come to the U.S. because most of her clients come from Brazil. There's a 3-month wait time for them, because there's such a high demand. And people, when they come here, they stay for like 10 days and they spend a lot of money. Not only, obviously, Epic Universe is a novelty, right? Everyone wants to go see what's new. But at the same time, they come here for the experience of being in Orlando, being in Central Florida. So the numbers are still expected to be good at this point.
Well, it'll be really interesting to see how things play out over the coming weeks and months. You can find my full interview with UCF economist Sean Snaith on our website, wcf.org/Newsnight. Okay, Universal, of course, is one of the backers of the proposed Sunshine Corridor. It's hoped the multi-billion-dollar project will link up Brightline and Sunrail services to provide connections between Disney Springs, the convention center in Universal, downtown, and the airport. Recently, the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission approved a $6 million study looking at the feasibility of the project. David Cook is Rail Administration Manager for the Florida Department of Transportation.
As we move forward with the project, connecting to the airport will be a tremendous addition to the Sunrail ridership. So we're looking at the airport, then over to the convention center, and then down to South High Drive and the Disney Springs area. So that ridership, just getting to the airport, triples, gets us up to well into close to 4 million riders. And then as we continue out to the convention center, we get up close to 5 million riders annually. And then that goes even up further once we get down to Disney Springs with another 1 million riders. So a big impact on the overall ridership with that connectivity to the airport, convention center, Disney Springs, and South High Drive.
David Cook from FDOT there. Okay, Ryan, let me start with you on this. What is the significance of this? They call it the Project Development Environmental Study, PD&E study, and the timeline on it. It sounds dry, but It's pretty important, right?
Yeah, no, it's a whole lot of jargon, but It is very important. We've already seen some ridership estimates and cost estimates, but this study will basically help hone in on some of those things. It'll help us figure out what the station mix might be, whether we're looking at a South International Drive station, whether we could get a station at Disney Springs, which is something the study could look at, how the existing system might connect with the connection to the airport and everything. Will we have like a transfer station or will it connect with a few of the stations along the line? So it'll be key to figuring that out. Also important is the federal funding and figuring out how much funding the project might be able to get in the long term. We're looking at a 2-year delta for that, just in terms of the schedule. They're looking at approving a contractor as early as June for that, and then it would take 2 years. So we're looking at 2027.
Interesting point on the federal funding. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty about the federal side of things at the moment. I mean, there are lots of things that the FD&E study pays for, environmental studies and that kind of thing.
And to your point, when we talk about the study, typically people's face glosses over. But as you pointed out, Ryan, it is so important for them to do this because they have to check this box because they can't really even ask for federal funding or even state funding until they make sure that they have done their due diligence. You talked about this person coming in as a consultant to really say, can this happen? If you want this to happen, this is how it should be done. So to your point, figuring out the exact route location, where the stop's going to be, operational costs, how this could impact the environment. And then really one thing that I'm interested in seeing is their funding strategy. So this is very expensive. And so there's already been a lot of conversation about who is going to pay for what and how much. And so long term, if we're going to have this, what will that look like in terms of making sure that we have the money to lay the tracks?
Well, it's a really long-term proposition. It's a $4 billion project, and certainly not something that's going to happen overnight, and we'll keep an eye on it here on the program. Be sure to find us on social media. Meanwhile, we're at WCF TV on Facebook and Instagram. You'll also find us at Newsnight WCF on X. Okay, finally tonight, another story that affects the tourism industry. The US Supreme Court last week cleared the way for the Trump administration to end deportation protections for Venezuelan immigrants in the United States. Hundreds of thousands face the loss of their temporary protected status, which had been extended under President Biden. Well, Florida International University recently published a survey of Venezuelans in our state to get their thoughts on current immigration policy. I talked this week with FIU Professor of Politics and International Relations, Eduardo Gamarra, about the survey, but we started with the impact of the Supreme Court's opinion.
The opinion of the court was it's a very, very short statement, and it really depends on how you interpret it. But the one thing it does is it essentially throws back to the court, the lower court, to decide on the issue, right? But in the meantime, what it's allowing the administration is to fast track the deportation of those who are on TPS. Now, it can also be interpreted exactly in the way you said. There are Nicaraguans who are on TPS, there are Haitians who are on TPS, and the ruling can be interpreted as applying directly to them as well. So then if you look at those figures, you're really looking at a very large number of people who are today in an absolute legal limbo.
I wonder if you can draw conclusions as to how people in the Venezuelan community come down on this based on their various immigration statuses. I mean, this FIU study talked to people with a diversity of legal status, whether it be TPS holders, US citizens, people that have naturalized, or permanent residents. And I wonder if their opinions tend to break down along those lines.
Yeah, very, very much so. Remember that this is an enormous number of people that it affects. And so much of the discussion here centers on really two things. One is the regret for having supported the Trump administration in November, which is about 50% of the population. And then others who are, and this is very interesting, that remaining 50%, which is sort of steadfast in its support for government policies. Those who are citizens tend to be much more conservative. Those who are citizens who have resolved their immigration status, right, aren't as concerned about immigration issues. Clearly, those who are in a transit situation, whether they are residents or have TPS or are in any one of those categories, those people tend to be much more affected. And so their opinions are clearly much more critical of what is occurring today.
Gio, there is a significant Venezuelan community here in Central Florida and throughout our state, of course. I wonder how Venezuelans here have been sort of digesting the news and what direct impacts have we seen?
It has been rough for this community specifically, and I actually just last week interviewed an immigration attorney to ask that very same question. What happens next? Yeah. You know, when you end the protections for that number of people, what is going to happen? Like, what is the solution for them at this point? What happens next? And the answer I got is wait and see, because there are so many developments that we are expecting from this Supreme Court decision that sided with the Trump administration at this point. But really, what that immigration attorney suggested is that this community now needs to find a way to be legalized here, you know, in the country, because they either have to apply for another kind of visa, and then we're talking about the maybe a student visa or maybe a asylum. You know,
and there's a lot of uncertainty over asylum as well.
Exactly. So it is a lot. It's very concerning, and we are talking about a large number, like the largest community in the state of Florida with TPS is the Venezuelans. Like, the Venezuelans are the ones that have the most, alongside the Haitians. So there is a lot of uncertainty for this community.
And we've already seen some practical impacts at Disney. Right? Mm-hmm. So what's been going on there? That the company has put on leave?
Yeah, 30
Venezuelan
days.
workers?
Mm-hmm. 30 days, 45 Venezuelan workers from the park, so what they refer to as cast members. They were put on a 30-day unpaid leave, but with all the benefits, meaning they will have to find a way to figure out their immigration situation, and within that time, they're not going to get their salary, but they are still going to keep all the benefits, health benefits, and all of that comes with it, because that was the way that Disney found to still support their employees while also complying with the law. So because there is a question here about what is going to happen and how the Disney is going to deal with it, they were like, we have to let this whole thing play out. So, you know, we can see what happens.
Yeah, how have the unions responded to that, Ryan?
They've kind of put out a statement hoping that the Disney would work with the employees who are impacted and trying to figure out that status, kind of supporting them during this process, and some mentioning that obviously Disney kind of has their hands tied legally by this, but hoping that they're able to figure out a way forward for a lot of these workers in terms of being able to stay, being able to keep their jobs and those sort of things.
The Trump administration has also targeted TPS and humanitarian parole, I think, for other countries that have large populations in Florida. Are there ongoing legal challenges when it comes to these other countries as well?
Yeah, I want to just focus on two in particular. And we talk about the demographics of Central Florida. As you mentioned, we have a large Haitian population in Central Florida, and that is another community that is really concerned about what they are seeing and how they could be impacted.
They've been really central to this battle over TPS.
Absolutely. Specifically, I want to focus on waiting on the Supreme Court's decision regarding deportation protections, not necessarily with TPS, but under humanitarian parole. This is members of the Haitian community, Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And so there was temporary residents here for humanitarian reasons, and in April, a lower court issued an emergency block to in April, a lower court issued an emergency order to block terminating their legal status. The Trump administration was accused of blocking people who were already granted humanitarian aid from applying for more permanent pathways to stay. This also includes people who came here from Ukraine, who were trying to get away from the Ukraine and Russian war. And then also people who are from Afghanistan, who had come here, who had helped the U.S. during the war there. And so, as we talked about the Venezuelans, they're not just that community. A lot of communities are concerned right now as they watch what's playing out.
Well, you mentioned the Haitian community. You've been talking to those guys, I think, Gio. In fact, there was a court hearing just this week in New York over that DHS decision to reduce the Biden-era TPS extension for Haitians. Do many in that community share the concerns that you've heard in the Venezuelan community?
100%. You know, the biggest concern for them is that the whole idea of TPS and the temporary protective status is you stay here until the situation gets better in your country, then you go back, right? And if we watch like a month of news worth of content from Haiti, we know that the situation is not getting better. If anything, it's getting much worse there. You know, we jailbreaks happening, you know, people who cannot afford living. So
gangs seem to be solidifying their control.
Exactly.
In much of that
So
country.
like imagining for this community, for them imagining to go back to their country and live through that is just astounding, you know, and it's actually dangerous for this community to go back. And we have to remember also, and that is the same immigration attorney I spoke with, I asked him, do you think this is going to, because this impacts right now currently, the TPS debate only is impacting Venezuelans. And I asked, do you think there is a concern for the Haitian community coming up? So he was like, 100%. The Haitian community is next, and they should be prepared for whatever is going to unfold from this, because clearly there was an effort there to kind of not to revoke and, you know, walk back from the TPS process at this point.
Yeah, and of course supporters of ending that TPS designation point to the name temporary protected status.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be temporary, and of course we'll see how that plays out as well. You can see my full-length interview with Eduardo Gamarra from FIU on our website. You'll also find a link to the FIU study there as well. It's all at wcf.org/Newsnight. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Giovanni Diaz, Randy Hildreth, and Ryan Lynch. Thank you so much for coming in, guys. Really appreciate it. Good conversation today. Just to let you know, Newsnight will be taking a break next week, but we will be back the following Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.